My name is Joanna Haverford, and the day my world shattered felt strangely quiet. There were no screams, no chaos, just the soft beep of a monitor going still, and the sterile hum of hospital machines around my husband's bed. For 48 years, Robert had been my anchor, my partner, the one person who always saw me, even when the rest of the world didn't. And just like that, with one long flat tone, he was gone. People always say grief comes in waves, but for me, it was a single heavy tide that refused to recede. I remember holding his hand long after the nurses had turned off the machines, as if warmth could somehow travel back into his body. But when I finally let go, the coldness in my fingers told me the truth. I was alone now. The funeral passed in a blur. Family and neighbors filled my living room with casseroles and murmured condolences. People hugged me, told me I was so strong, and made promises to check in, promises I knew they wouldn't keep. But through it all, there was one face that stood out to me. Melissa, my daughter-in-law. She had a look in her eyes that wasn't grief. It was calculation. At first I told myself I was imagining it. After all, Melissa was my son's wife, the mother of my grandchildren. Surely she wouldn't use Robert's death as an opportunity for whatever it was I saw flicker across her face. But as I watched her moving through my house, straightening picture frames, chatting with guests, quietly taking note of who brought what, I felt something cold coil in my stomach. That night, after everyone left, I walked through the house alone. The walls seemed to echo with Robert's laughter, with the voices of our children when they were little. I touched the banister he had built himself, ran my hand across the dining table where we'd hosted decades of family dinners, and finally stood in front of the fireplace mantel covered in photos of a life well lived. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was the story of us. A week later, Melissa stopped by under the guise of helping me sort through paperwork. I made tea, trying to be gracious, though I was still raw from the funeral. We sat at the same kitchen table Robert and I had shared every morning for decades. Then, without preamble, Melissa said it. "You know, Joanna, this house is a lot for you to manage on your own now. Maybe it's time to sell. You don't need it anymore." For a moment, I just stared at her. I wanted to believe I'd misheard her, that she hadn't just told a grieving widow, her husband's mother, to get rid of the very home Robert and I had built together. But her expression was clear. Melissa wasn't being kind. She wasn't concerned about me. She was plotting. I forced a small, polite smile, the kind I'd mastered over years of being the peacekeeper in the family. "I'll think about it," I said softly. Her lips curled into something that might have passed for sympathy, but her eyes told me she thought she'd already won. That night, I sat at my desk in the study, Robert's study, and opened the old wooden box where we'd kept our most important papers. Inside were our wills, the deed to the house, our savings bonds, everything that represented a lifetime of sacrifice and love. As my fingers brushed over Robert's handwriting, I felt something shift inside me. Melissa thought I was weak. That grief had left me too broken to fight. But she had forgotten one thing. I was Robert's wife. For nearly half a century, I had built a life with him quietly, steadily, without fanfare. I had been the foundation of this family. And foundations, even when shaken, don't crumble that easily. As I sat there in the dim glow of the desk lamp, one thought crystallized in my mind. If Melissa believed she could take my home from me, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The morning after Melissa's visit, I woke up feeling like a stranger in my own house. Every room I stepped into seemed to echo with Robert's presence, the dent in the couch cushion, where he always sat, the coffee mug still resting on the counter from the last day we shared breakfast. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like my memories were being threatened, as if Melissa's words had poisoned the air in my home. I spent the morning watering Robert's rose bushes in the backyard. He'd loved those roses, pruning them with meticulous care every spring. As I bent down to touch the petals, Melissa's voice rang in my ears. "Maybe it's time to sell. You don't need it anymore." That wasn't concern. That was ownership. Later that afternoon, my son Mark stopped by. He seemed distracted, almost nervous. "Mom," he started, avoiding my eyes. "Melissa mentioned you might be thinking of downsizing. Honestly, she might be right. This house is a lot for you to handle on your own. I felt my chest tighten. My own son. I gave him a long look. Mark, do you really think I can't take care of my own house? He hesitated, then sighed. It's not that. It's just, the market's good right now. You could get a lot for it. It might make sense to, free up some cash for retirement. Maybe even help out with the kids' college funds. There it was. Melissa hadn't wasted any time pulling him in. I didn't argue. I just smiled faintly and said, I'll think about it. Mark seemed relieved, as though he had fulfilled some unpleasant duty. He kissed me on the cheek and left, never noticing the way my hands trembled slightly as I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. That evening, I called an old friend, Diane, who had been my closest confidant since our teaching days. We'd shared everything over the years: classroom frustrations, marital fights, even the silly things our students used to say. When I told her what Melissa had said to me, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. That woman has always had a sharp tongue, Diane said finally. But Joanna, this isn't about your well-being. It's about control. Don't let her push you out of your own life. I won't, I promised quietly. But I didn't tell Diane what was already forming in my mind, a plan that would require patient secrecy and the kind of resolve people never expect from someone my age. The next few weeks were a strange performance. Melissa began dropping by more frequently, each visit laced with carefully chosen words. It must be exhausting keeping up with all the repairs, she'd say, glancing around the living room, as if she were already planning where her furniture would go. Another time she handed me a brochure for retirement villas in Florida. Look, Mom, you'd love the weather there. And the HOA takes care of everything. No stress. Every time I smiled politely, nodding as if she were doing me a favor. Inside, though, a fire was building. I even started letting her help me sort through boxes of old belongings in the attic. I watched her eyes light up whenever she came across something valuable. My mother's antique jewelry, Robert's coin collection, even the china set we'd saved up for years to buy. Each time she admired something, I mentally added it to a list. One afternoon, Melissa arrived with a realtor in tow. This is Ms. Grant, she announced with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. She specializes in historic homes like yours. We thought maybe she could give you an idea of what the house could sell for. I raised my eyebrows but kept my voice mild. How thoughtful of you. The realtor walked through the house, complimenting the original woodwork and the large yard. Melissa trailed behind her, practically glowing with anticipation. When Grant finally left, Melissa turned to me eagerly. See, you could get way more than you think. This is perfect timing, Joanna. Perfect timing. I smiled again, my face betraying nothing. Maybe you're right, dear. I'll give it some thought. That night, after she left, I sat at Robert's desk again. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing. At the top, I wrote one word in block letters. Plan. Below it, I listed everything I needed to do. Call Mr. Lawson, Robert's old lawyer friend. Review the will. Explore options for creating a trust. Contact Diane's nephew who worked in real estate. Quietly appraise the house on my own terms. By the time I put the pen down, I felt strangely lighter. Melissa thought she was orchestrating my future. But what she didn't know was that I had just taken the first step toward taking back my power. The next week, I called Mr. Lawson and arranged to meet privately at his office. When I arrived, he greeted me with a warm smile. Joanna, it's been years. I'm so sorry about Robert. He was a good man. Thank you, I said softly, my throat tightening. Then I told him everything about Melissa, about Mark's hesitance, about the pressure to sell the house. He listened carefully, then leaned back in his chair. Joanna, you don't owe anyone this house. If you want to protect it and your husband's legacy, there are ways to make sure it stays out of greedy hands. I left that meeting with a stack of papers in my purse and a resolve as solid as the bricks of the house Melissa so desperately wanted. She thought she was clever, but the truth was I had just begun to outplay her. A few days later, Melissa stopped pretending. She arrived at my doorstep one morning, not bothering with her usual sweet smile. Instead, she looked impatient, as if she had grown tired of the game we'd been playing. Joanna, we need to talk, she said the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked straight to the kitchen table and sat down, her arms crossed. I noticed she didn't even remove her coat. She wasn't here for tea or small talk. Look, she began, her voice sharper than usual. It's time to be realistic. This house is too big for you. Mark and I have been talking, and we both agree you should sell it. You don't need it anymore. There it was. The line she had been circling for weeks finally said outright. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I studied her face. There was no trace of compassion, no acknowledgement that I was still mourning my husband. All I saw was a woman who believed she was entitled to what wasn't hers. Melissa leaned forward. You could make a lot of money, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life, and you'd still have plenty left over to help the kids. Isn't that what you want? Her words were coated in false generosity, but the truth was clear. She wasn't thinking about my comfort. She was thinking about her gain. I forced a small smile. It's a big decision. I'm not ready yet. Melissa's lips tightened. Joanna, with all due respect, you need to be ready. You're alone now. What happens if something goes wrong? If the roof leaks or the furnace breaks? Mark and I can't always be here to help. It wasn't concern. It was pressure thinly disguised as logic. I set my teacup down gently. I appreciate your advice, but I'll decide when the time is right. She stared at me, clearly frustrated that I wasn't giving her the answer she wanted. You can't keep living in the past. Robert's gone. It's time to move on. Those words hit me like a slap. Robert's gone. Move on. I felt something inside me harden. But instead of snapping back, I just smiled again. Thank you, Melissa. I'll think about it. Her eyes narrowed. For a moment, I thought she might push further, but she didn't. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and left without another word. That night, I sat at Robert's desk again, staring at the stack of papers Mr. Lawson had given me. Trust documents, deed transfers, instructions for setting up a charitable foundation in Robert's name. I traced my fingers over the folder, feeling a strange sense of clarity settle over me. Melissa thought I was stalling, but what she didn't know was that I was already several steps ahead. The following weekend, Melissa invited me to dinner at her house. Mark was there, sitting at the head of the table, looking more uneasy than usual. As we ate, Melissa brought it up again, this time in front of him. Joanna, we found a great realtor who could list your house quickly. She says you could get top dollar. The market's hot right now. This could be perfect for everyone. Mark cleared his throat. Mom, Melissa has a point. It would be easier if you didn't have to take care of the house anymore. I set my fork down slowly and looked at my son. Easier for who, Mark? Me? Or you? The color drained slightly from his face. Melissa jumped in. Easier for everyone. Look, we're just trying to help. You've got so much equity tied up in that house. It doesn't make sense to let it sit there while you're living all alone. It was the first time she'd let the mask slip completely. I smiled softly. I appreciate your concern. Really, but I'm not ready to make any decisions. Melissa let out a frustrated sigh. Joanna, this isn't just about you. Think about the kids. Think about their future. Selling the house could help with their college funds, give them opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise. There it was again, using the grandchildren as leverage. I kept my voice calm. Melissa, my husband, and I worked our whole lives for that house. We raised our children there. It's not just a piece of property, it's my home. And I'll decide what to do with it in my own time. Her jaw tightened. For a brief second, her composure cracked, and I saw the anger simmering beneath her carefully constructed facade. Mark stayed silent, clearly uncomfortable, but he didn't defend me. When I got home that night, I realized something important. Melissa wasn't going to stop. She saw me as an obstacle, not as a person, so I stopped waiting for her to change. The next morning, I called Mr. Lawson again. Let's move forward, I told him. Everything we talked about, I want it done. Quietly. He didn't ask for details. He just said, "You're doing the right thing, Joanna." Over the next few weeks, I met with him several times. We finalized the trust, set up a foundation in Robert's name, and arranged for the deed to be transferred upon my passing. Melissa would never get the house. But she wouldn't know that until it was far too late. One afternoon, Melissa showed up again unannounced. She looked around the house with a critical eye, as though she were already deciding which walls to knock down. This place could be so beautiful with the right renovations, she said casually. I smiled. I'm sure it could. Have you given more thought to selling? She asked, her tone sharper now. Yes, I said truthfully. Her eyes lit up, and I sipped my tea, meeting her gaze evenly. I'll let you know when the time comes. She didn't like that answer, but I loved watching her squirm. That night, after Melissa left, I walked slowly through the house. Each step echoed softly in the quiet, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself truly feel the weight of my memories. The front hallway still held Robert's favorite coat on its hook, the one he wore on our morning walks. The smell of his cologne lingered faintly in the fabric as if refusing to leave me completely. I reached out and touched it, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the ache in my chest settle. The living room told the story of our life together better than any photograph ever could. The worn spots on the couch from years of sitting side by side, the scratches on the coffee table from when the kids were little and did their homework there, the faint discoloration on the rug where a glass of red wine had spilled during a holiday dinner. It was all part of us. Melissa saw only square footage, equity, and profit. But this house was my history. I walked into the kitchen and traced my fingers along the counter Robert had installed himself. He had been so proud of it, even though it wasn't perfectly level. I could almost hear his voice teasing me about how it gives the kitchen character. From there, I climbed the staircase slowly, my hand gliding over the banister. Robert had sanded and stained it himself one summer. It still bore a small dent from the time our son had dropped his toy truck down the stairs. Every mark, every imperfection was a memory. I stepped into our bedroom. The room felt emptier without him, but his presence lingered, his old slippers tucked neatly under the bed, his nightstand still holding the book he'd never finished. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the wedding photo on the dresser. Robert had been so handsome that day, standing tall in his black suit, his hand gently resting over mine. Melissa wanted me to erase all of this. She wanted me to walk away from the life Robert and I had built as if it were just a piece of real estate. But she didn't understand. This wasn't just a house. It was the sum of every laugh, every tear, every sacrifice Robert and I had made for our family. The next morning, I wandered out to the backyard. Robert's rose bushes were in full bloom, their petals a soft pink against the early sunlight. I knelt down and touched one, gently remembering how he used to whistle while tending to them. I whispered softly, "I won't let her take this from us." I knew he couldn't answer me, but I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me, as if somewhere he understood. Later that day, Diane came over. She brought her famous lemon pound cake just like she always did when I needed cheering up. "Joanna, you don't owe them anything," she said as we sat on the porch with tea. "You've done enough for your son, for Melissa, for the grandchildren. This house, this life is yours. Don't let her bully you into giving it up." I nodded, grateful for her support. "She thinks I'm weak, Diane. She thinks I'll just roll over and hand her everything." Diane smirked knowingly, then let her keep thinking that. We both laughed softly, but there was truth in her words. That evening, I opened the old wooden box again, the one Robert and I used for all our important papers. Inside was the original deed to the house, Robert's life insurance policy, and our joint will. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through each document, the reality of what I was about to do settling in. I wasn't just protecting my home. I was protecting Robert's legacy. For decades, we had sacrificed to build this life, to pay off the mortgage, to save for our children, to make sure they had more than we ever did. But that sacrifice had never been meant to feed someone else's greed. That night, I sat at the desk, pen in hand, and began drafting a letter to Mr. Lawson. "I've decided to move forward with everything we discussed. Please ensure that the house is protected under the trust in Robert's name. It must never be sold or taken by anyone with selfish intentions. This home will be preserved for the community as Robert would have wanted." I signed my name firmly at the bottom. As I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, I felt something lift from my shoulders. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt in control. A few days later, I received a call from Mr. Lawson. "It's all set, Joanna," he told me. "The paperwork is finalized. You're now the trustee, and upon your passing, the property will go directly to the foundation, untouchable by anyone else." I thanked him, my heart pounding with relief. Melissa had no idea, and that was exactly how I wanted it. That evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, I sat on the porch and watched the golden light spill across the yard. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. Robert had always said I was stronger than I believed. And now for us, I was proving it. She thought she was taking everything from me, but she had no idea that I was quietly, carefully making sure she would end up with nothing. In the days that followed, Melissa seemed more confident than ever. She dropped by unannounced each time with a new suggestion about next steps for selling the house. One afternoon, she arrived holding a glossy binder from a realtor. "Joanna, look at these listings. These homes would be perfect for you, smaller, cozier, so much easier to manage." She flipped through the pages, eagerly pointing out sunny Florida condos and newly built townhouses in nearby suburbs. I nodded politely, smiling as if I were truly considering them. "They look lovely, Melissa. You've put so much thought into this." Her face lit up at my words, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. She believed she was winning. But behind my calm expression, I was already several moves ahead. That week, I visited Mr. Lawson's office again. "Everything's ready," he said as I sat down. "The trust is in place, and the foundation paperwork is nearly finalized. Once you sign these last forms, the property will be legally protected. Melissa and Mark won't have any claim to it. Not now, not ever." I picked up the pen, my hands steady. "Then let's finish it." As the ink dried on my signature, I felt an almost electric sense of resolve. It was done. The home Robert and I had built together, was safe. When I got home, Melissa called almost immediately. "Mark and I have been talking," she said brightly. "We'd love to help you start packing up some of the old things you don't need anymore. We can get a head start on decluttering before you list the house." I could hear the excitement in her voice. She thought she was orchestrating everything perfectly. "That's a great idea," I said smoothly. "Maybe next weekend." Melissa sounded thrilled. "Perfect. We'll bring some boxes. You'll feel so much better once this is all sorted out." I thanked her sweetly and hung up a small smile tugging at my lips. Let her keep thinking she was in control. That weekend, Melissa and Mark came over as planned. They moved through the house with the eager energy of people already claiming what wasn't theirs. Melissa lingered over my mother's antique jewelry, holding up a pearl necklace with a greedy gleam in her eyes. "This is stunning. You should think about passing these down now, Joanna. No sense in keeping them locked away forever." I smiled politely. "Maybe one day soon." Mark stood awkwardly in the corner, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to challenge his wife. I didn't say a word. I just watched and waited. Later that evening, after they left, I carefully returned every piece of jewelry to the safe in my closet. I double-checked that the safe was locked, then slipped the key into a new hiding spot they would never think to check. They didn't know it yet, but the day they thought they'd get everything was the day they'd get nothing. In the following weeks, I continued my quiet act. Whenever Melissa asked about progress, I told her I was still thinking or working on it. Whenever she grew impatient, I reassured her gently, and slowly her guard came down. She stopped suspecting me, stopped questioning my delays. But behind the scenes, I was taking steps Melissa would never see coming. Diane's nephew, who worked in real estate, helped me appraise the house privately. "Joanna," he told me after walking through the property, "this home could fetch a fortune. But honestly, I don't think you should sell it. Not if it means giving up everything you and Robert built." "I'm not selling," I told him with a small smile. "Not ever." He nodded knowingly. "Good. Then let me make sure Melissa never gets her hands on it." Every night, I sat at my desk and reviewed my notes, double-checking each detail of the trust. I spoke with Mr. Lawson regularly, making sure every piece of paperwork was airtight. I arranged for my valuables to be placed in a safety deposit box under my name only. I updated my will, making sure Melissa's name was nowhere on it. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Then came the day Melissa thought she'd been waiting for. She called me one morning, practically giddy. "Joanna, I found a buyer. She's a friend of my cousin, and she's willing to make a cash offer. No inspections, no contingencies. Isn't that amazing?" Her voice dripped with excitement. "That's wonderful, Melissa," I replied warmly. "Why don't we all meet together soon and talk about it?" I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "Yes, I'll set it up." As soon as I hung up, I called Mr. Lawson. "It's time I told him." He chuckled softly. "You've been patient, Joanna. Let's make sure this ends exactly how you want it to." That night, I stood at the window looking out over the backyard where Robert's roses swayed gently in the evening breeze. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. Melissa thought she had played me perfectly. But the truth was, she was the one being played all along. I whispered softly, as if Robert could hear me. I told you I'd take care of things, love. And I will. The following week, Melissa arrived at my house looking more triumphant than ever. She came armed with a thick folder of real estate paperwork, her voice bubbling with excitement as she stepped inside. Joanna, I can't believe it. We've got the perfect buyer. She's ready to close quickly, and the price is exactly what you deserve. Everything's falling into place. I gestured for her to sit at the kitchen table just as I always did. That's wonderful news, Melissa. You've been such a help to me through all of this. Her eyes lit up at my praise. Well, I just want what's best for you. And honestly, this is going to be a huge weight off your shoulders. No more worrying about maintenance repairs. You can finally relax and enjoy life. I smiled softly. You're right. It will be a big change, but maybe it's time. Melissa practically beamed. Exactly. We've already talked to Mark, and he agrees. This is the best decision for everyone. I let her talk, nodding as if I were completely on board. Inside, I felt the faintest hint of amusement. She had no idea that every signature, every document she thought I'd be signing was meaningless to me. That afternoon, she walked me through the timeline for selling. We'll start packing up next week. The buyer wants to move in by the end of the month. Isn't that exciting? Oh yes, I said lightly. Very exciting. Melissa couldn't hide her satisfaction. She believed I had finally surrendered. Later that night, after she left, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in Robert's study. On the desk sat a neatly organized folder containing the finalized trust documents and the deed transfer to the foundation. Everything was complete. No matter what Melissa thought, the house was already legally protected. Over the next several days, I let Melissa help me sort through the house. She moved from room to room, opening drawers, commenting on my belongings, clearly imagining which ones might someday be hers. At one point, she picked up a delicate porcelain figurine Robert had bought me for our 25th anniversary. This is beautiful. You know, Joanna, you don't really need all these old things anymore. It might be nice to pass them down now. I smiled sweetly. Maybe I will. Melissa's eyes gleamed. Even Mark seemed convinced I was finally giving in. One evening, he called me. Mom, I just wanted to say I think this is the right choice. It'll be better for everyone once you're settled somewhere new. I listened quietly, my heart aching a little at how easily he'd been swayed. Thank you for caring, Mark, I said softly. You've always been such a good son. There was a pause on the line, as if my words had struck a nerve. I just want you to be okay, he murmured. I smiled even though he couldn't see me. I will be. By the time the so-called family meeting rolled around, Melissa was practically glowing. She had invited her parents over, too clearly eager to show off her victory. As we sat around my living room, she took charge of the conversation. Everyone, we're finally moving forward. Joanna's decided to sell the house. It's going to be so wonderful for her to start fresh, and the buyer is thrilled to get such a historic home. Her mother clapped her hands together. Oh, Melissa, that's fantastic. Such a smart decision. Melissa smiled proudly, glancing at me as if waiting for my approval. I nodded graciously. Yes, it feels like the right time. Melissa leaned back, fully satisfied. She truly believed she'd won. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch in the cool evening air. The roses Robert had planted were swaying in the breeze, their petals catching the soft glow of the porch light. For the first time, I allowed myself a quiet laugh. Melissa thought she was leading the game. But the truth was, she'd been a pawn in mine all along. A few days later, she brought over more paperwork, convinced we were nearing the end of the process. Joanna, you just need to sign these forms so we can officially get everything moving, she said, sliding the papers across the table. I glanced at them, then picked up the pen. Of course. I scrawled my name across the dotted line, knowing full well these papers meant absolutely nothing. Melissa smiled in victory. I'm so proud of you, Joanna. This is going to be amazing for everyone. Yes, I said softly, meeting her gaze. Amazing. That night, I placed a call to Mr. Lawson. It's all in motion, I told him. He chuckled knowingly. Then we'll be ready when the moment comes. She'll never see it coming. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. Melissa believed I was finally handing her everything she wanted. But what she didn't know was that every step she celebrated was leading her closer to the moment her world would collapse. I whispered softly to the empty room, "Patience, love. She'll get what's coming to her." And for the first time in a long while, I slept soundly, knowing I was the one holding all the cards. The following morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in months. Melissa thought everything was finally going her way. She'd been giddy during our last meeting, her voice practically trembling with excitement as she talked about our big step forward. But the reality was far different. I had already arranged the final meeting with Mr. Lawson to lock in every detail of my plan. When I arrived at his office later that day, he greeted me warmly. "Joanna," he said, standing to shake my hand, "I've reviewed everything. The trust is officially complete, and the deed transfer is now finalized. As of today, this house is legally protected. No one, not Mark, not Melissa, not anyone can touch it." The words washed over me like cool water on a scorching day. "It's really done?" I asked softly, my throat tightening. He nodded. "It's done. Upon your passing, the property will immediately go to the foundation in Robert's name. It bypasses probate entirely. There's no loophole for anyone to exploit." I exhaled slowly, feeling an incredible sense of relief. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for helping me do this." Mr. Lawson smiled kindly. "Joanna, you're protecting more than just a house. You're protecting a legacy." As I drove home, I thought about Robert. He had been the kind of man who never asked for much. His greatest joy was taking care of his family, me, Mark, our grandchildren. I knew deep down that he would have been proud of me for standing my ground. When I got home, I walked through the room, slowly touching the familiar walls, the furniture we'd chosen together, the photographs that told the story of our life. For the first time since his death, I felt like I had truly honored him. That evening, Melissa called. "Joanna, great news! The buyer's ready to move fast. We can close as soon as next month." "Isn't that wonderful?" Her voice was bright, full of victory. "That's lovely, dear," I replied warmly. "I'm glad everything is going so smoothly." She didn't realize how carefully I was matching her enthusiasm. Every time I sounded agreeable, she grew more confident, and that made what was coming all the sweeter. Over the next week, Melissa came over nearly every day. She opened drawers, sifted through closets, and made comments about how nice it will be once we clear this place out. I smiled and nodded through it all. One afternoon, as she packed up some old kitchenware I no longer used, she said casually, "You know, Joanna, once the house is sold, Mark and I can really start planning for the kids' college. This money will be such a blessing." I looked at her, my expression as serene as ever. "I'm so glad this will help your family, Melissa." She smiled back, oblivious to the irony of my words. Meanwhile, I continued making quiet moves of my own. I met with Diane's nephew again to discuss the house's appraisal, not because I planned to sell, but because I wanted an official record of its value for the foundation. I also made arrangements to move my most precious belongings: Robert's journals, our wedding album, a few heirlooms to a secure storage unit. Melissa would never know they existed. Each step I took made me feel stronger, more in control. Finally, the day came when Mr. Lawson confirmed everything. "The trust has been registered with the county. The deed transfer has been recorded. Joanna, even if Melissa hired the most expensive lawyer in the state, there's nothing she could do to overturn this." Hearing those words felt like reclaiming every piece of power Melissa had tried to take from me. "Thank you," I told him again, "for everything." He leaned back in his chair, smiling. Sometimes the quietest victories are the most satisfying ones. That evening, I sat in Robert's study, staring at the folder that contained the official documents. For months, Melissa had believed she was outsmarting me. She thought I was a grieving, helpless widow who couldn't manage her own affairs. But the truth was, I had been orchestrating everything from the very beginning. Later that night, Melissa called again. "We're almost there," she said cheerfully. "The buyer's thrilled, and Mark's so relieved you're finally making the right decision. Everything is working out perfectly." I let her speak, then said softly, "I'm glad you think so, dear." If she noticed the faint amusement in my voice, she didn't comment on it. After the call, I walked to the backyard and stood by Robert's roses. The evening air was cool, carrying the faintest scent of the blooms he had loved so much. "I've taken care of it, love," I whispered. "She'll never get her hands on our home. Not now, not ever." The wind rustled the leaves gently, and for a moment I could almost feel Robert beside me. I wasn't just protecting the house. I was protecting us. And Melissa had no idea she was about to lose everything she thought she'd won. The day of the so-called family meeting arrived with Melissa in full command of the event. She had planned it all herself, inviting Mark, the grandchildren, and even her parents. She wanted witnesses for her victory. When I opened the door, Melissa was beaming. "Joanna, we're so excited. This is a big day for you." I stepped aside and let them all in, greeting my grandchildren warmly. They ran past me to the living room, completely unaware of the tension building beneath the surface. Melissa carried a sleek leather folder tucked under her arm, her nails perfectly manicured as if she'd dressed for a celebration. She sat down at the head of my dining table like a queen presiding over her court. "Okay," she began brightly. "I've got all the papers ready. Once we go through the details, we can sign, and everything will be official." Her confidence was almost amusing. I sat across from her, my expression calm, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Melissa started explaining the next steps, speaking as though she were the one making all the decisions. "The buyer's agent just needs your signature to finalize the process," she said, sliding a set of documents toward me. "Once that's done, we can close in 30 days. Everything will move quickly from there." She glanced around the room, clearly expecting approval from everyone. Mark nodded silently, looking down at his hands. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't objecting either. Her parents exchanged pleased looks, whispering softly to each other. It was exactly the scene Melissa had dreamed of. I reached out my fingers, brushing the papers lightly, but I didn't sign. Instead, I looked at her and said, "Melissa, you've gone to so much trouble for this. I appreciate all the effort you've put in." She gave me a wide smile. "Of course. It's the least I could do. This is going to be such a good change for you and for all of us." I tilted my head slightly as if studying her. "For all of us." Her smile wavered just a fraction. "Well, you know, the kids, Mark me. This will really help everyone in the long run." I sat back, folding my hands again. "Melissa, do you know why I've been so quiet all this time?" Her brow furrowed. "Because you were grieving." "Yes, I was grieving," I said softly. "But I was also watching, listening, learning exactly how far you would go." Mark looked up, startled. Melissa let out a short, nervous laugh. "Joanna, what are you talking about? We're just trying to do what's best for you." I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm but firm. "Melissa, this house isn't going anywhere. It's already been placed in a trust. It belongs to a foundation in Robert's name, and there is nothing you or anyone else can do to change that." The room went completely silent. Melissa's face froze, her mouth opening slightly before she snapped it shut again. "What?" she whispered. Mark looked between us, his face pale. "I protected this home," I continued evenly. "Every legal step has already been taken. You will never own it. You will never sell it. And when I'm gone, it will go to charity, just as Robert would have wanted." Melissa's hands trembled as she snatched up the papers, flipping through them as if they could somehow contradict my words. You tricked me," she finally spat. "No," I said calmly. "You underestimated me." Mark buried his face in his hands. Melissa's parents looked uncomfortable, clearly realizing they'd just watched their daughter's arrogance unravel in real time. "You can't do this," Melissa shouted suddenly, her voice sharp and shrill. I met her gaze evenly. "I already have." For the first time since Robert's death, I felt powerful. Melissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Her face was red, her eyes wide with fury. "You've ruined everything," she screamed. I remained seated, completely composed. "No, Melissa, I saved everything from you." Mark finally spoke, his voice quiet but full of shame. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have stood up for you. I didn't see it before, but now I see exactly what she was doing." I placed a hand gently on his. "It's not too late to remember who you are, Mark. You don't have to follow her lead anymore. He looked at me, tears welling in his eyes, and for a brief moment I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who once ran down these same hallways laughing, not the man who had been too weak to defend his own mother. Melissa, however, was beyond reasoning. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Her parents followed awkwardly, muttering something about needing to get home. Mark stayed behind, his head bowed in quiet regret. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet again, just as it had been after Robert's funeral. But this time, the silence felt different. I had won. Melissa had believed she was orchestrating my future. But in the end, I had been the one writing the script all along. The day after the meeting, my phone rang early in the morning. Melissa's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello." Her voice was sharp, furious. "How dare you humiliate me in front of my family? Do you know how ridiculous you made me look?" I kept my tone calm. "Melissa, I didn't humiliate you. You did that all on your own. You've been playing me this whole time," she snapped. "You smiled, you nodded. You let me do everything, and for what? To make me look like a fool." "No," I replied evenly. "To show you exactly who you are. I didn't take anything from you, Melissa. You tried to take something from me and failed." There was silence on the line, and then she hissed, "You'll regret this." "I already regret something," I said softly. "I regret trusting you for as long as I did." I ended the call. That afternoon, Mark came over, his face pale and drawn. "Mom," he started, quietly sinking into the chair across from me. "Melissa hasn't stopped yelling since last night. She's furious. She says you made her look stupid." I looked at him steadily. "Mark, she did that to herself. She showed her true colors, and now you can't ignore them anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. "I don't even know who she is anymore. I thought she cared about you, about family. But last night, seeing her face when she realized she wasn't getting the house, it was like she'd lost the only thing that mattered to her." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Mark, I don't blame you. Love can blind us. But now that you see her clearly, you have a choice to make. Not just for me, but for yourself. And for your children." His eyes filled with tears. "I failed you, Mom. I should have protected you. I should have stood up to her the first time she mentioned selling the house." I squeezed his hand gently. "It's never too late to do the right thing, Mark. But you have to decide what kind of man you want to be." Over the next few days, Melissa's anger only grew. She sent me message after message, long, bitter paragraphs accusing me of being spiteful and selfish. She even tried guilt. "You're ruining this family, Joanna. You're tearing us apart. You could have helped us, but instead, you chose to punish us." Each time I refused to respond. Melissa wanted a fight, but I wouldn't give her one. One evening, Mark came by again. He looked exhausted. "She's been calling her parents, her friends, anyone who will listen, trying to paint herself as the victim," he admitted. "But Mom, people are starting to see through her. They're realizing what she really wanted." "And what about you, Mark?" I asked softly. He lowered his gaze. "I've been a coward. I let her push you. I let her treat you like you didn't matter. But I promise you that ends now." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope for my son. "Then start with this," I told him. "Be the man Robert raised you to be. Stand up for your family, for your children, for yourself." He nodded slowly, determination hardening his expression. "I will," he said quietly. Melissa, however, wasn't done. The next morning, I saw her car pull up in front of my house. She stormed to the door, banging on it so hard the windows rattled. I opened it calmly. "Melissa." Her face was flushed, her eyes blazing. "Do you realize what you've done? Mark's furious with me. He's talking about separation. This is your fault." "No," I said evenly. "This is yours. You tricked me." She shrieked. I met her gaze steadily. "I didn't trick you, Melissa. I let you show everyone exactly who you are. You played yourself." She glared at me, breathing heavily. For a moment, I thought she might actually try to shove her way inside. But then she spun on her heel and stormed back to her car, slamming the door so hard the sound echoed down the street. I stood in the doorway watching her drive off. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad anymore. I just felt free. That evening, Mark called again. "She's furious," he said quietly. "But Mom, I've been thinking, You were right all along. I let her convince me this was for the greater good. But the truth is, she just wanted control. And what are you going to do about it? I asked. He hesitated for a moment, then said, I'm going to protect you from now on. I don't care what it takes. I won't let her treat you this way ever again. When I hung up, I walked to Robert's study and sat at his old desk. I ran my hand over the polished wood, the same desk where we'd planned our lives, paid our bills, and dreamed of the future. For the first time since his death, I felt like I had truly honored him. Melissa could rage all she wanted, but I had already won. Melissa didn't disappear quietly. If anything, she became louder, more desperate, and far more vicious in her attempts to regain control. Within a few days, she was telling anyone who would listen that I had betrayed her and Mark. She painted herself as a dutiful daughter-in-law who had only been trying to help, claiming I'd turned the whole family against her. I heard about her rants from neighbors, from Diane, even from the ladies at church. She's been telling people you're ungrateful, Diane said one morning over coffee, that you're hoarding money that should have gone to the grandchildren. I sipped my tea calmly. Let her talk. People eventually reveal who they really are, Diane. I don't have to say a word. Melissa's next move was public. She posted a long message on social media, an elaborate story about how she and Mark had selflessly cared for me after Robert's death, and how I had blindsided them by donating the house to strangers. It was dramatic, manipulative, and full of half-truths. But instead of garnering sympathy, the post backfired spectacularly. The comments poured in, friends, extended relatives, even acquaintances calling her out for her entitlement. It's her house. She can do what she wants with it. Sounds like you were counting on her money. That's not a good look. Taking advantage of a grieving widow. Shameful. Melissa had clearly expected support. Instead, she got humiliation. Mark showed up at my house later that day, his face tight with anger. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said the moment I opened the door. Melissa's completely lost it. I told her to take that post down, but she refuses. I gestured for him to sit. Mark, you can't control her. You can only control yourself. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't even recognize her anymore. I thought she cared about family, about us. But now I see she only cared about what she could get. I placed a gentle hand over his. Seeing the truth is painful, but it's also freeing. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. I wish Dad were here. He would have known what to do. I smiled softly. Your father always believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard. Be that man, Mark. For yourself. For your children. Melissa, meanwhile, doubled down. She started calling other relatives, trying to turn them against me. But most of them had already heard enough to understand the truth. When she realized her usual tactics weren't working, she tried guilt one last time. You've ruined this family, she told me in a voicemail. Do you know what you've done? The kids will suffer because of your selfishness. I didn't respond, because by then I'd realized the most powerful answer to cruelty is silence. A week later, Mark came by again, this time with the grandchildren. He looked tired but different, stronger somehow. Mom, I've been talking to the kids, he said quietly as they played in the yard. I told them none of this is your fault, that their grandmother has always been there for them. My heart ached with relief. Mark, thank you, I whispered. I also told Melissa, he added, his jaw tight, that if she can't stop this behavior, I'll file for separation. I won't let her poison the kids against you anymore. I nodded, pride swelling in my chest. That's the man your father raised. Melissa's parents eventually stopped defending her too. They visited me one afternoon, their faces full of shame. We're so sorry for what she's done, her mother said softly. We never realized how far she'd go. I gave them a small smile. Sometimes people only show their true selves when they think they've already won. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun set, the golden light bathing Robert's rose bushes. I thought about how far I'd come from the night I lost him to the months of manipulation to finally standing my ground. Melissa had tried to erase me, but instead she'd erased herself. The house was safe. Mark had finally opened his eyes. And Melissa, she had destroyed her own reputation without me lifting a finger. When Diane visited the next day, she found me tending to the roses. You look different, she said with a smile. I feel different, I replied. For the first time since Robert died, I'm at peace. Melissa could rage plot and scream all she wanted, but she'd already lost. Because real power isn't in yelling the loudest. It's in quietly holding your ground until the truth speaks for itself. Melissa's downfall didn't happen all at once. At first, she tried to salvage her image, telling Mark she had only been thinking of the family, that she had meant well, and that I had manipulated everything. But Mark wasn't buying it anymore. Melissa, he told her one night, his voice flat. I was there. I saw how you acted. You weren't helping Mom. You were helping yourself. She bristled. So now you're taking her side. No, he replied evenly. I'm taking the side of what's right. And you stopped being on that side a long time ago. I only knew about their conversations because Mark confided in me later. She won't admit it, he said, sitting at my kitchen table one evening, but I think she knows she's lost me. Every time she talks about you, it's like she's trying to twist the story so she doesn't look bad. But Mom, I see her now. I see all of her. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Seeing the truth is hard, but it's the first step toward freedom. Meanwhile, Melissa's attempts to turn the rest of the family against me had completely failed. The more she talked, the worse she looked. Relatives who had once politely tolerated her began distancing themselves. Friends who had initially believed her sob story quietly stopped returning her calls. Even her parents were fed up. We tried to defend her, her mother told me in a hushed voice one afternoon. But after everything we've heard, we can't anymore. She needs to face the consequences of her own actions. Mark started spending more time at my house, often bringing the children with him. One afternoon, as the kids played in the backyard, he sat down beside me on the porch steps. Mom, he said quietly, I can't do this anymore. I can't live with someone who only sees people as tools to get what she wants. Dad would be ashamed if he saw what I'd become. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked at me. I let her control everything, even how I treated you. But I promise you, that ends now. I felt my own eyes sting with tears. Mark, your father raised you to be a good man. It's not too late to be that man again. Not long after, Melissa moved out temporarily, claiming she needed space. But everyone knew the truth. Her marriage was crumbling. Her friends, the ones who hadn't already abandoned her, stopped praising her curated life on social media. Her reputation was in tatters, and for once she had no one to blame but herself. One night, Mark came over alone. He sat at the table, hands clasped tightly. I've spoken to a lawyer, he said quietly. I'm filing for separation. I can't raise my kids in a home where greed and manipulation are normal. They deserve better than that. I placed a hand on his. Mark, I'm proud of you. This isn't easy, but it's right. He nodded, his jaw tight. I should have done this sooner. Melissa, of course, didn't take the news well. She stormed to my house one evening, pounding on the door like before. You've destroyed my marriage, she screamed the moment I opened the door. No, Melissa, I replied calmly. You destroyed it yourself. She stared at me. Her face twisted with anger. You think you've won, she spat. You think you've ruined me? You have no idea. I interrupted her softly, my voice steady. Melissa, I don't need to ruin you. You've done that on your own. Mark appeared behind me then. Go home, Melissa, he said firmly. She spun toward him, shocked. You're just going to let her talk to me like that? Yes, he said simply, because she's right. Melissa's face crumpled. For the first time, she looked less furious and more lost. But I felt nothing for her. I had spent too long being quiet while she schemed. Now my silence was my power. As she finally turned and left, slamming the door behind her, Mark let out a long breath. I can't believe it's taken me this long to see her clearly, he murmured. I touched his arm gently. Sometimes love blinds us to what we don't want to see. But once you know the truth, you can never unsee it. That night after he left, I stood at the window looking out over Robert's roses. The moonlight illuminated them softly, the same roses Robert had planted with such care decades ago. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Melissa's power over my family was crumbling. The house was safe, and Mark was finally finding his way back to himself. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I whispered softly, We're okay now, Robert. We're really okay. For the first time in years, I slept without worry, because the life Melissa had tried to take from me was mine again. Weeks passed and Melissa's world grew smaller. With the separation papers filed, she tried everything, pleading with Mark, blaming me, even threatening to take the children. But Mark had found his strength, and for once, he didn't back down. "You won't win," he told her calmly. "Not this time. The kids need stability, not manipulation. I won't let you hurt them the way you tried to hurt my mother." Melissa was stunned. For years, she had controlled every conversation, every decision. Now she was the one losing control. "I heard bits and pieces of their fights from Mark when he came over to see me. She still thinks you tricked her," he admitted one evening as we sat in the living room. "But I told her the truth. She tricked herself. She thought she could use Dad's death to get what she wanted, and she failed." There was sadness in his voice, but also relief. "It's strange," he said softly. "I loved her once. I thought she loved me too. But now I see she only ever loved what she could take." I reached out, squeezing his hand. "It takes courage to admit that, Mark. Your father would be proud of you." Meanwhile, Melissa's carefully curated social life collapsed. Her friends stopped inviting her to events. People she once looked down on now looked down on her. Even her parents distanced themselves, tired of defending behavior they could no longer justify. It was as though the entire facade she had built around herself had finally crumbled, leaving only the truth behind. As for me, life felt lighter. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. Instead, it felt like a sanctuary again, a place filled with Robert's memory, with the laughter of my grandchildren, with quiet mornings where I could finally breathe. One sunny afternoon, I walked out to the backyard to tend to Robert's roses. As I knelt down, gently pruning a stem, Diane appeared at the gate holding a picnic basket. "I thought you could use some company," she said with a warm smile. We sat together on the porch eating sandwiches and reminiscing about old times. "You seem different," Diane remarked. "Stronger. Happier." I admitted. For so long I let Melissa's greed weigh me down. But I realized something, Diane. Power isn't about yelling the loudest. It's about knowing who you are and never letting someone take that from you. A few days later, Mr. Lawson called. "The foundation is fully set up now," he told me. "We've even started planning community programs for the property once it's transferred. Joanna, you're leaving an incredible legacy in Robert's name." Tears welled in my eyes as I thanked him. It felt right. Not just protecting the house, but turning it into something good. That weekend, Mark brought the children over. They ran through the yard, laughing, their little feet pounding against the grass Robert had once so carefully mowed. Mark stood beside me, watching them. "Mom," he said softly, "I can't thank you enough. You've given me back my courage. My kids will grow up knowing what's right because of you." I smiled at him. "No, Mark. You did that yourself. You just needed to remember who you are." Later that night, after they left, I sat at Robert's old desk and opened one of his journals. His handwriting, neat, deliberate, spilled across the pages. Notes about the roses, grocery lists, thoughts about life, family love. On one page in his familiar script he had written, "Joanna is stronger than she knows. She just doesn't see it yet." I traced the words with my fingers, tears streaming silently down my face. Melissa might have thought she'd won, but the truth was, I had found my strength and taken back everything she had tried to steal. That night, as I stood on the porch, the air cool and still, I whispered softly, "We did it, Robert. She'll never take this from us." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't just feel relief. I felt peace. Melissa's unraveling came swiftly after that. With Mark moving forward with the separation, she became more erratic. She tried to rally her few remaining allies, but even they were tired of her endless blame games. "She's obsessed with the house," Diane told me after running into Melissa at the grocery store. She kept saying, "You stole her future." People are starting to pity her, but not in the way she wants. They see her for what she is now. It was strange hearing that. For so long, I had felt like I was the one being pitied, an aging widow, quiet and easily overlooked. But now, the tables had turned completely. Mark visited often, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone. "She's furious," he told me one evening, his hands curled around a mug of coffee. "She keeps saying she's going to fight for everything she can get in the divorce." "But Mom, The more she talks, the more I realize how little she values what actually matters. I gave him a small, sad smile. Melissa isn't fighting for her marriage, Mark. She's fighting for control. That's all she ever wanted. He nodded slowly. I know, and I'm done giving it to her. One afternoon, Melissa showed up uninvited again. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes wild with anger. You think you've won, don't you? She spat. You think you've ruined my life? I met her gaze calmly. Melissa, I didn't ruin your life. I simply stopped letting you ruin mine. She let out a bitter laugh. You're pathetic. You'll die alone in this house and no one will even care. I stepped forward, my voice steady. No, Melissa. I'll die, knowing I protected everything Robert and I built together. I'll die knowing I stood up for myself. Can you say the same? Her face crumpled. For a brief moment, I saw not anger, but fear. And then, without another word, she turned and stormed away. That evening, Mark arrived at my door. She served me divorce papers today, he said quietly, holding the envelope in his hands. I guided him to the couch, placing a hand over his. How do you feel? He stared at the papers for a long moment before answering. Free, he said finally. Sad, but free. Over the next few weeks, Melissa's world collapsed entirely. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, cut off from most of her former friends. Her social media accounts went dark. Even her parents stopped defending her, having finally accepted the truth about their daughter. Meanwhile, Mark seemed lighter every day. The kids came over more often, filling the house with laughter. They loved running through the backyard, weaving between Robert's rose bushes, their joy filling every quiet space Melissa had once tried to poison. One afternoon, as I watched them play, Mark sat beside me on the porch. You know, he said softly, Dad always told me you were the strongest woman he knew. I didn't understand it before, but now I do. Tears welled in my eyes. Your father always believed in me more than I believed in myself. Mark smiled faintly. Maybe now you'll believe it too. That night, I walked through the house, pausing at every room. The living room where Robert and I had celebrated anniversaries. The dining room where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners. The study where we'd planned our lives together. Everything we'd built was still ours, and Melissa would never take that away. Before heading to bed, I stepped outside one last time. The night was cool, the roses swaying gently in the breeze. I whispered softly, It's done, Robert. She's gone, and we're still here. For the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel victorious. I felt whole again. Melissa's power had dissolved. Mark had found his way back. And I had finally proven to myself that I was stronger than I'd ever realized. The morning was bright and still when I decided to visit Robert's grave. I hadn't been there since everything with Melissa had finally come to an end. For months, my visits had been tinged with grief, anger, and exhaustion. But today felt different. I picked one of the loveliest roses from our backyard, a soft pink bloom Robert had always loved, and wrapped its stem gently in a ribbon. As I drove to the cemetery, I felt a strange mix of sadness and peace, like closing the final chapter of a long, painful book. When I reached his grave, I knelt down slowly, brushing my hand over the cool stone. Hi, love, I whispered, my voice catching slightly. The grass around the headstone was neatly trimmed, the flowers from my last visit long since wilted. I placed the fresh rose gently against the base of the stone. We did it, I said softly. The house is safe. Melissa, she's out of our lives now. And Mark? He finally opened his eyes. He's finding himself again. You'd be proud of him. Tears welled in my eyes as I traced Robert's name with my fingers. You always told me I was stronger than I believed. I didn't understand it then. But now I know you were right. I didn't let her win. I didn't let her take everything we built together. The wind rustled through the trees, a gentle sound that felt almost like an answer. I sat there for a long time, remembering our life together. The day we first walked through the empty house, imagining where we'd put the dining table. The nights we stayed up late talking about dreams we couldn't quite afford yet, but chased anyway. The countless mornings where Robert would hand me a cup of coffee with that quiet, knowing smile of his. This house had been our life, and now it would be our legacy. When I finally stood, I felt lighter, not because Melissa was gone, but because I was no longer carrying the weight of anger. On the drive home, I found myself thinking about the future. For so long, my life had revolved around protecting what was mine, defending my past. But now, for the first time, I felt free to think about what came next. A week later, I met with Mr. Lawson and the foundation's director to discuss plans for the house after my passing. They wanted to turn it into a community library and garden, two things Robert would have adored. As they explained the details, I smiled through tears. He always believed knowledge should be shared, I told them. And he loved nothing more than tending those roses. This feels right. When I returned home that day, the grandchildren were playing in the yard. Mark was with them laughing, really laughing for the first time in what felt like years. I stood on the porch watching them, my heart full. This house wasn't just a building. It was a living piece of our family's story. And someday it would be part of something even bigger, something that mattered. That night, I sat at Robert's desk one more time. I opened one of his old journals and found a page where he'd written, "Home isn't just where you live. It's where you love, where you grow, and where you leave a piece of yourself for others." I smiled through tears, closing the book gently. "You were right, Robert," I whispered. "And now this home will keep giving even when I'm gone." As I turned off the light and climbed the stairs, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just peace, but purpose. I wasn't just the widow who had been underestimated. I was Joanna Haverford wife, mother, grandmother, and finally, the woman Robert always knew I could be. Life after Melissa's departure felt strangely quiet, but it wasn't the suffocating silence I had once known. It was peaceful. The house once shadowed by tension and manipulation felt alive again. Mark and the grandchildren visited often, their laughter filling the halls like sunlight breaking through clouds. Each morning I tended to Robert's roses. Each evening I sat on the porch with a cup of tea watching the world move gently around me. For the first time in a long time I felt free. But freedom, I realized, wasn't just about winning. It was about choosing what to do next. I had spent months focused on protecting what was mine, our home, our legacy, my dignity. Now it was time to live again. I began volunteering at the local library, reading to children during weekend story hours. Their curiosity reminded me so much of the students I'd once taught, and the quiet pride Robert always had in my work. Before long, I found myself helping plan a new community garden as part of the foundation that would one day own my home. It felt right, pouring my time and energy into something that would outlast me. One afternoon, Diane visited while I was planting bulbs near the roses. "You look happier," she said with a smile. I admitted. For so long I let anger and grief guide me. But now, I feel like I'm finally living for myself again. And for Robert. Diane reached over, squeezing my hand. "You've always been stronger than you gave yourself credit for, Joanna. I'm just glad you see it now, too." Even Mark seemed lighter. The separation from Melissa had been difficult, but he was rebuilding. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, he said softly, "Mom, you saved me, you know. If you hadn't stood up for yourself, I don't think I ever would have realized how far I'd drifted from who I was." Tears pricked my eyes as I placed my hand over his. "You saved yourself, Mark. You just needed someone to remind you of your strength." As the months passed, Melissa faded completely from our lives. I didn't know where she lived now or what she was doing, and I didn't care. Her absence was a blessing, a space where healing could finally grow. One evening, as the sun set behind Robert's roses, I felt an urge to speak to anyone who might be listening. Maybe it was for the women like me who had spent their lives giving only to be discarded when they were no longer useful. Maybe it was for anyone who had been underestimated, silenced, or taken for granted. "If you're listening," I whispered into the golden light, "don't let anyone decide your worth. Don't let them take from you what you've built with your own hands. You are stronger than they think, stronger than you think. And sometimes, the quietest revenge is simply keeping what's yours." The wind stirred softly, carrying the scent of roses through the air. I smiled. That night before bed, I stood at Robert's study one last time. The desk was still neatly arranged, his journals stacked in the corner. I placed my hand on the wood, closing my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." for giving me a life worth protecting, and for leaving me strong enough to face the world without you. As I climbed the stairs, I realized something. My story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my strength, and my dignity. Melissa had taken so much from me in spirit until the day I decided enough was enough. I turned off the lights, the house warm and quiet around me. Tomorrow I would tend to the roses. I would read to the children at the library. I would keep building the life Robert and I had always dreamed of. Because in the end, real power isn't about wealth, property, or control. It's about living on your own terms no matter who doubts you. I smiled to myself as I drifted off to sleep, knowing that my story, the story of Joanna Haverford, wasn't ending. It was just beginning again. And if anyone ever tried to underestimate me again, they'd learn the same lesson Melissa had. Quiet strength is the kind that never loses. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you weren't strong enough, remember my story. We all have the power to rise. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's simply living well.